welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti, and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to heading back to New York with you to cover one of the most powerful underbosses of all time, Aniello Dellacroce. If you're enjoying the channel and would like to become a Racket Reviews patron, please head on over to the Patreon account and join the Coletti family. Now, without further ado, we have much to discuss, so let's get right to it. Aniello Neil John Dellacroce was born in Manhattan, in New York City's Little Italy, to Italian immigrant parents Francesco and Antoinette Dellacroce on March 15, 1914. He would have one brother, Carmine, who died in 1969, and would grow up there. In fact, Dellacroce would remain in Manhattan regarding his career and his personal life. Before we get too far into this review, I do want to pause and just take a moment to appreciate Aniello Dellacroce's name. Not only does it sound like a movie character, but the real meaning of his name is actually even cooler. In Italian, the word Aniello, spelled a bit differently, but pronounced the same, means lamb. Della means of the, and croce means cross. So Aniello Dellacroce's name is literally Lamb of the Cross. That's an extremely religious name, and to make things even more cinematic, Dellacroce would later in his career be known as Father O'Neill, as he would dress as a priest in an attempt to hide from law enforcement. But more on that a little bit later. Dellacroce would go on to marry an Italian girl by the name of Lucio Riccardi, and the couple would go on to have two children, a son, Armand, and a daughter, Nanny. He would also have a son with a woman, Elizabeth Main, out of wedlock, and their son's name would be Ronald. Later in his life, it is believed that he would marry a woman named Rosemary Connolly. Other reports say that the couple never married, it's unclear, and he would sire 3 more children with her, Skipper, Sean, and Shannon. As a teenager, Dellacroce would work as a butcher's assistant, but quickly left the straight and narrow path to pursue a life of crime. He would find work under the Vincent Mangano crime family, working especially closely with the family's underboss, Albert Anastasia, who took Dellacroce under his wing. Under Anastasia, Dellacroce would perfect his craft as a mobster and become a force to be reckoned with. Standing at 5'10" with broad shoulders, Dellacroce became known as the Tall Guy. He also received the nickname Polak due to his features being more similar to someone of Polish descent rather than Italian, although no one would dare call him that to his face. More than his height, breadth, and strength, Dellacroce's most intimidating features were his eyes. They were things of legend, and they were soulless and had a seemingly spooky quality that would strike fear into even the bravest of men. An FBI agent described Dellacroce as the Archangel of Death, saying he likes to peer into his victim's face, like some kind of dark angel at the moment of death. Newspapers reported his eyes had no color, as if his soul was transparent. Former FBI investigator Joseph Coffey said, "Dellacroce was one of the scariest individuals I've ever met in my life. Dellacroce's eyes were like he didn't have any eyes. Did you ever see Children of the Damned? His eyes were so blue that they weren't even there. It was like looking right through him." In 1930, at only 16 years old, Dellacroce was sentenced to 2.5 years at Elmira Reformatory after a burglary conviction. Upon his release, he got right back into crime, and by 1937, he was pleading guilty for assault. For that, he was sentenced to 4 months at a workhouse. Because of his close association with Albert Anastasia, Dellacroce was fiercely loyal to him. He also had another friend to whom he was very close, and that was Armand Thomas Rava. It's believed that it's due to Dellacroce's affection to Rava that he named his son Armand when he was born in 1955. Dellacroce was proudly Catholic, and was once known to have murdered a man while dressed as a Catholic priest to avoid getting caught, hence the nickname Father O'Neill. Dellacroce was focused on secrecy, and was known to have taken body doubles with him to commit crimes so that he could escape while police wasted time chasing down his doppelganger. Vincent Mangano would disappear on April 19, 1951, after several instances of infighting with Anastasia over the issue of Anastasia working with Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano without Mangano's permission. There's something I do want to clarify here, and that's that Albert Anastasia, while he was technically an underboss to Mangano, was very much a boss in his own right, although not officially. This type of tension caused a lot of problems between the two men in leadership. Many suspect that Anastasia was responsible for Mangano's death, although a body has never been recovered, and no one has ever been charged. Albert Anastasia took on the role of boss of the family after Mangano's disappearance and placed his protege, Aniello Dellacroce, into the role of capo. This was probably the most prosperous and calm time for Dellacroce. He was a captain, he enjoyed working with Anastasia, and he also purchased the Ravenite Social Club in Little Sicily. This club was very prosperous and would soon become Dellacroce's headquarters and a popular mob hangout. It was also during this time that the young upstart John Gotti had started making a name for himself in the lower ranks. He would run errands for Anastasia Capo, Carmen Fatico, as well as several other jobs with various gangsters. Gotti would soon meet Dellacroce, and apparently Dellacroce saw leadership quality in Gotti because he took him on as a protege and absorbed him into his crew. Another one of Anastasia's men, Carlo Gambino, was less satisfied in his role than was Dellacroce. Gambino was Anastasia's underboss, but had aspirations to become the boss of the family. Gambino's opportunity came in the mid-1950s when Vito Genovese wanted to move against Frank Costello. However, in the commission, Costello was strongly backed by boss Anastasia and vice versa. Gambino caught word of this, and in exchange for Genovese's help with taking out Anastasia, Gambino agreed to help Genovese in orchestrating this takeover and becoming boss of the entire Mafia commission. An attempt was made on Costello's life in 1957, and although he survived the attack, he opted into retirement. With Costello out of the way, Genovese and Gambino could now move against Anastasia. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia's murder would take place at a barber shop, and Gambino would secure his role as boss. Although Dellacroce had been a loyal underling and friend to Albert Anastasia, he did not seek revenge against Gambino. When you're living in a world where constantly men are usurping one another and having coups and throwing each other over, it makes sense that Aniello Dellacroce did not seek revenge against Gambino because as far as he was concerned, this was just business. Dellacroce maintained his role as capo, and Gambino placed Joseph Biondo, with whom he had worked to orchestrate Anastasia's murder, as underboss. A month later, in November of 1957, Genovese wanted to solidify his and Gambino's positions as bosses, so he called the Appalachian meeting in Appalachian, New York. He also needed the opportunity to get his arms around the entirety of Cosa Nostra's national influence. So mobsters from all over the country were invited to attend to discuss everything from Cuba to narcotics to the garment industry to loan sharking. 1957 is possibly one of the most important years in Mafia history, and as you'll know from several of the previous videos, this Appalachian meeting did not go well. While Gambino is suspected of having attended, he was not apprehended. Genovese was apprehended, but let go. This looked really bad on Genovese, and Gambino knew it was yet another opportunity to make a move. It is reported that he worked with Luciano to get a drug charge lobbed against Genovese after this and was successful. On April 17, 1955, Genovese was put away for 15 years on a drug charge, and he would die in prison. Gambino was now not only the boss of his own family, but in control of the entire commission, much to the aggravation of Dellacroce, who preferred to stay in the sidelines and out of the spotlight. Gambino's underboss Biondo had a reckless habit of publicly womanizing, which Gambino felt brought down the entire family name. Although what really got Gambino upset was Biondo getting involved in a waste management racket in New Jersey without permission or kickbacks. Gambino would then demote Biondo all the way down to soldier, a huge insult, and place Dellacroce in the seat of underboss in 1965. Dellacroce, although not a fan of Gambino, was quiet and patient, both qualities that paid off for him positionally. In 1966, Tommy Lucchese was in poor health, and so Joseph Colombo, Carlo Gambino, Carlos Marcello, and several others, including Dellacroce, met in Queens to discuss the redistribution of Lucchese's businesses and assets. 13 men, including Dellacroce, were arrested at this event, which was later dubbed Little Appalachian. By 1970, Dellacroce's business interests had expanded into nearly everything. Throughout his life, he would be arrested, charged, or accused of involvement in loan sharking, gambling, hijackings, and homicides. Specifically in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Dellacroce was involved with the underground and politically charged business of operating gay bars throughout the city. Although his name is not specifically listed on any deeds, he was heavily involved with, invested in, and received kickbacks from various gay bars in New York City, especially by the 1980s. Perhaps as a further connection to this, or perhaps not, his son Armand died with AIDS. Now, a few qualifiers here. Armand died with AIDS, not of AIDS, and he was also a known drug addict, so he was constantly exchanging dirty needles with other people. But in the 1980s, the story of a mob boss's son being diagnosed with AIDS was quite the juicy story. Dellacroce's influence expanded across the United States, but was particularly potent in New York, California, more specifically Hollywood, and Florida. In 1971, Dellacroce was sentenced to 1 year in prison for contempt of court. When summoned and brought before a New York State grand jury investigating organized crime, he refused to answer any questions despite having been granted immunity from prosecution. It only got worse for him from here. On May 2, 1972, Dellacroce, now 58 years old, was arrested at his Ravenite social club, but was released on a $15,000 bail for tax evasion. He was charged by federal authorities for not paying taxes on stocks worth $112,500. By 1973, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for this charge. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino would die of natural causes. It was the expectation of everyone in the underworld, and those who were in law enforcement, that Dellacroce, who was wrapping up his tax evasion sentence, was the obvious next choice for leadership. However, in a last-minute upset, Gambino chose his brother-in-law and cousin, Paul Castellano, to take over the family headship. By the time Castellano had sworn in on November 24, 1976, Dellacroce was able to attend the ceremony. While his objection was not public, the Gambino family would soon be split into two factions, those who agreed with Gambino's choice to promote Castellano, and those who believed that Dellacroce was the rightful leader. Gambino had attempted to lighten this blow by assuring that Dellacroce would remain as underboss, but it was just too controversial. Dellacroce was too much of the obvious choice, and he had far too much influence and power and loyalists for it to be a smooth transition to Paul Castellano. New York police detective Ralph Salerno said, "When Carlo Gambino died, if I'd been asked to place a $10 wager as to who would be his successor, I would have put the $10 on the man who was his underboss, Aniello Dellacroce, a tough man. Of all of the gangsters that I've met personally, and I've met dozens of them in all of my years, there were only two who, when I looked them straight in the eye, I decided I wouldn't want them to be really personally mad at me. Aniello Dellacroce was one, and Carmine Galante was the other. They had bad eyes. I mean, they had the eyes of killers. You looked at Dellacroce's eyes, and you could see how frightening they were, the frigid glare of a killer." The Gambino family always had a strange relationship with the drug trade. Outwardly, leadership was against it, but there was so much involvement in narcotics that one would have to believe that this was more of a suggestion rather than a rule. When Castellano took control, however, he had every intention of killing any of his men involved in the drug trade, although that would have been an impossible standard to hold at this point. Gotti was already deep in the drug trade and was making money hand over fist with its distribution. He would eventually be charged for selling heroin. Although Gotti had been his protege, Aniello Dellacroce obeyed Castellano's ban on the drug trade, even though, practically speaking, it was more of just lip service. In 1979, Dellacroce would be indicted in a murder charge involving the body of a New York bookie, Charlie Calise. Dellacroce, along with his associate Anthony Plate, were suspected of murdering Calise on the belief that he was an informant. There was a pretty strong case, too. However, while on trial, Plate disappeared. Because of that, the entire case ended as a mistrial. Dellacroce's relationship with the family leadership was lukewarm at best. It was no secret that he had issues and disagreements with the way that the family was run. But Dellacroce really hadn't been content with leadership since Anastasia died. Besides, it was no use fighting leadership at this point, as Dellacroce had been diagnosed with cancer. Dellacroce would be charged for racketeering in the 1985 Mafia Commission trials on February 25, 1985. Aniello John Dellacroce never got his just desserts on the racketeering charges because he would die from cancer on December 2, 1985, at Mary Immaculate Hospital in Queens. His son Armand would die just 1 year later. He was laid to rest at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. Paul Castellano did not attend his funeral. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing one of the most secretive mobsters in New York and also one of the most powerful, Aniello Dellacroce. Although his eyes had a completely soulless quality, he inspired loyalty, and he definitely knew when to keep his mouth shut. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter what you think about Aniello Dellacroce. Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section and social media to let me know who or what you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao.